Okay, I guess I'll share my screen then.
Perfect.
Okay. Uh, okay, The Space Race by Gavin, William, and Jay. So, what was the space race? The space race was a competition between the old Cold War rivals, the good old USA and the communist USSR. In my opinion, there wasn't really a big point to it because both countries were just trying to improve their spaceflight capability, which to me doesn't mean quite a lot, but I guess it does to them. It started in 1955 when both the US and the USSR announced that they were going to launch satellites into orbit. The USSR was the first to do so in successfully launching the Sputnik 1 in 1957. The US didn't launch their first successful satellite, the Explorer 1, until early 1958, and both countries had some help from some German rocket engineers, as the US took Werner von Braun from Germany, and the Soviets took Ukrainian born Sergei P. Korolev to engineer their rockets.
This is very interesting.
Then, in 1961, almost 4 years after the launch of whoops. Okay. So in 1961, almost 4 years after the launch of Sputnik, the USSR successfully put the first man into space. And 3 weeks later, the US successfully put the first American in space. Now you might be thinking, at this point, the Americans were like tired of being beat and embarrassed by the Soviets, and you're right, they were. So soon after the launch of the first American, the U.S. President John F. Kennedy announced that America would be the first to land a man on the moon inside the time limit of a decade. And so they did. In 1969, the Americans launched the Apollo 11, and the Apollo lunar module Eagle successfully became the first spaceflight to land on the moon. And Commander Neil Armstrong became the first man to set foot on the moon. And he said that very famous quote, "One small step for man, one huge leap for mankind." Okay, what was the main cause of the space race? Okay, the space race took place during the Cold War, and the Cold War was part of the reasons that the space race had happened. Because during the Cold War, both the US and the USSR were trying to outdo each other with communism and capitalism. And it was a major competition. The space race was somewhat the same thing, but with less violence. Both countries were trying to outdo each other by proving they had better spaceflight capability, and the US eventually rose to the top as the better country, despite the USSR pulling away with the Sputnik, the first man in space, and even the first dog in space. But the space race was really just a competition between the two superpowers to outdo each other in spaceflight technology. The end of the space race. Now, the US had won the space race in 1969 when Neil Armstrong and his crew landed on the moon. But the space race didn't end formally for another 6 years until 1975. The formal end of the space race was in 1975 when the US sent 3 astronauts aboard an Apollo spacecraft and docked in orbit with a Soviet Soyuz vehicle. This event was called the Apollo-Soyuz mission because an Apollo spacecraft was docking with a Soyuz vehicle, so it just made sense. The two commanders of the spacecraft shook hands, marking the end of the space race and forming good relations toward the end of the space race and the Cold War.
Okay, so how did the space race impact people's lives then? The space race helped all of the astronauts and engineers and commanders, etc., as all of the people taking place in this historic event gained quite a lot of fame during this all, and they will be in the record books forever. But otherwise, it didn't really impact the citizens much back then, but the accomplishments that both countries made were one of the biggest prides for the people. For the Americans, the people were really proud to be the first people to land a man on the moon. The Soviets were proud to be the first country to put a satellite in orbit successfully and to be the first country to put a man into space. From the country's perspective, the space race led to a huge advancement of technology, which allowed both countries to spread their communist and capitalist ideologies even faster through forms of film, which is basically TVs, movies, and all that. So also the space race and the Cold War and World War II, etc., made the people a lot more aware of propaganda, since a lot was used in the wars. How did the space race impact our lives now? The space race led to some amazing things like satellite Wi-Fi, sending people to space, and the big concept of space flight, which some people like Elon Musk are developing even further right now. Without those smart engineers like von Braun and Korolev, we would still be in the middle of figuring out spaceflight. This also helped a lot of people like Musk, and I bet he's using some of these concepts to colonize Mars. In all, the space race definitely helped quite a bit of people and led to some amazing discoveries and advancements of spaceflight, and some records and people that will never be forgotten. The Arms Race by William, J. and Gavin. The advancement in nuclear physics. In nuclear science, there had been years of discoveries in America's Manhattan Project. During the Second World War, there had been atomic bombs created by the Manhattan Project, or the MP. America first tested its first nuclear weapon, named Trinity, on the deserts of New Mexico on July 16, 1945. Trinity had the same atomic destruction power that is equivalent to 20,000 tons of TNT. Once the birth of atomic bombs came out, people started testing and using them regularly. In August that same year in 1945, two bombs were detonated over exactly two cities and killed at an estimate approximately 180,000 people. William.
On November 1, 1952, approximately 7 years after the detonation of the nuclear explosive device, the Trinity, America then test shot and detonated another type of bomb, the first thermonuclear weapon. America used fusion explosive of theoretically limitless power to make the bomb measure over 10 tons and used fusion explosive of theoretically limitless. Wait, let me restart. America used fusion explosive of theoretically limitless power to make the bomb measure over 10 megatons and blast it generated across the land, so it was extraordinary and powerful. The inferno was 5 miles wide, heading in mushroom clouds which was 25 miles high and 100 miles across. The remaining debris after the bomb rolled around the Earth, occasioning international alarm about the disadvantages and the bad effects it could have on the environment.
Okay, so as you can see here, we made like a little recap of what happened to Japan, the nuke weapons, Little Boy, and Fat Man. So basically, if you don't know, Little Boy is an atomic bomb created by the US and dropped on the Japanese city Hiroshima in 1945. It was a gun-type fission weapon, but it derived from its power from the nuclear fission of uranium-235, while the bomb Thin Man was based on a fission of plutonium-239. So uranium-235 is an isotype of uranium, making up about 0.72% of natural uranium. Unlike the predominant isotope uranium-238, it is fissile, i.e., it can sustain a fission chain reaction. It is the only fissile isotope that exists in nature as a primordial nuclide. Uranium-235 has a half-life of 703.8 million years. Plutonium-239. So it's similar, but it's an isotope of plutonium. So plutonium-239 is the primary fissile isotope used for the production of nuclear weapons, although uranium-235 has also been used. Fat Man is also an atomic bomb created by the US and also dropped on the city Nagasaki. It was built at Los Alamos Laboratory. It was dropped from the Boeing B-29. This implosion-type plutonium bomb, nicknamed Fat Man, weighed 10,800 pounds. The plutonium core was surrounded by 5,300 pounds of high explosives. Plutonium core reduced to size of tennis ball. Fat Man used plutonium Pu-239. So overall, the efficiency of Fat Man was 10 times of that of Little Boy, and it was worth 21,000 tons of TNT, which is 1,900, which is 1905080 kilograms. So Nagasaki is a Japanese city. So this is like a diagram of the bomb.
Wow.
Finally, we have competition between the US and the USSR, this is what I wrote. Even though the US had pretty good success making and testing bombs, especially the first hydrogen one, they had some competition with the USSR's progress. The USSR also successfully tested a hydrogen bomb in 1953, just 1 year after the US tested their bomb. Since the US would also respond henceforth to threats and capabilities of other countries attacking theirs with perhaps its entire nuclear might. Since since the US and USSR both had developed nuclear bombs, many people predicted that them too would be deterred theoretically from starting a war, something called mutually assured destruction, otherwise, which in short form is MAD, we're mad. American physicist Oppenheimer made the statement, nuclear deterrence more likely that the US and USSR made it as a metaphor, that the two countries were like two scorpions in a bottle, one capable of killing another. But in order to achieve that for one of them, each one risks their own lives. For some comic relief, we added like a kind of like a meme for y'all to laugh at a little. So for comic relief. The end. So any questions?